So I've had a few interesting conversations with clients over the past few weeks in and around how you react when you're hit by adversity. And I want to speak a little bit around that today because I feel like I can drop some knowledge here in which can really help a lot of you when it comes to working past hard and difficult times. But for those of you that don't know me, my name is Finn. I'm an online coach for one of the biggest men's transformation coaching brands in the UK, having transformed hundreds of men. So I know a thing or two around getting in shape, building your mindset, and overall becoming the best version of you. So I've had a few conversations with clients this week, like I mentioned, and I'm not going to go into depth. I'm not going to name any names, but they ended up getting hit with adversity, right? They ended up facing some setbacks. They received some bad news, and it ultimately led them to losing their head a touch, falling off plan, and ultimately losing the progress in which they had made that week. Now, one thing in which I've always preached, and one thing in which I well and truly believe, because I've ultimately seen it myself firsthand, and that is ultimately the quote of, your success in life is dictated around how you react when times are tough as opposed to when times are good. I'm not even really too sure if that is a quote, but I heard it on a podcast once and it's stuck with me ever since. And I think when times are good, when things feel easy, when you're motivated, when you're in routine, when you're consistent, when you found that flow, found that groove with things, anyone can ultimately tick the boxes, do the actionables, do the non-negotiables in which they need to do in order to get the result in which they want. That's easy. I think I actually heard it in an Alex Hormozy podcast once. It was something around, if you're disciplined in doing what you enjoy, then you're not disciplined. You're only disciplined when you do the things in which you do not enjoy. And ultimately, the men that can work through hard, stressful situations, that can work through the adversity, the quote unquote learn to dance in the rain as opposed to wait for the rain to pass, they're the guys that win in life. They're the guys that achieve their goals. They're the guys that go on to do great things. They're the guys that are successful. If you're unable to do that, if you're unable to work through hard times, if you're unable to work through adversity, if you fold the minute a spanner gets thrown in the works, then you're going to have a really hard time doing that. And I suppose I could kind of quote that back to a story, the story of when I had a heart attack, when I came down with a life-threatening illness, which was a viral infection called myocarditis, where I ultimately had inflammation build up around the heart. I had a cardiac event due to that, ended up in hospital for just over a week, I believe. And then I was on a 3-month training ban from there whilst my heart was recovering, which I did make a full recovery, thank you for asking, but lost all my muscle in the meantime, lost my physique, lost my confidence, lost my self-belief. I was at rock bottom. I was at rock bottom. But one thing in which I did not do was sit still. I controlled the variables in which I could. I focused on what I could control, because ultimately I couldn't train, so that was out of my control. Okay, put that to one side. I can't train for the following 3 months. I accepted that. Don't get me wrong, I didn't really accept it. I was I was very, very down about that, but ultimately it was one of them things. I'm smart enough to follow the doctor's advice, so I didn't train for 3 months. But what I did do was I still showed up for my clients. I was a one-to-one PT on the gym floor at the time. I was online coaching with a handful of people, still showed up for them. I still ran PT sessions week to week, and I was still busy on the gym floor. I was still showing up to check-ins. And throughout that time, I was like, well, look, if I can't train, then what can I do? Well, I can focus on posting content, which I still did. I got my head down and I studied. I really focused on my education within that time. Because like I say, I couldn't train. So if I had all this free time, or I had an extra hour or two back each and every day, then I got on an education portal, I studied, I was learning to master my craft, I was becoming better as a coach. And I ultimately tried to do everything that I could within that period in order to try and somewhat continue moving forward, despite the fact that I'd been hit with that adversity, that setback. And the reason I go back to that quote of, your success is really dictated on how you react when times are tough as opposed to when times are good, is that when I was able to go back to training, I'd done the smart thing. I hired a coach in order to give me that accountability to get back in shape. I booked in a photo shoot because I wanted that photo shoot for the accountability in order to do so. But within that time, that is when I landed the job of becoming a coach under Ben and joined what would eventually become New Gen Coaching. I was one in about 200 coaches which applied for that job, and I ultimately got the role. And yes, I had to apply for the job. I had to go through a case study. I then had a one-to-one call with Ben. And through that period in which I was unable to train, but I still showed up for my clients, I still got that experience on the gym floor, I still showed up to check-ins, I heavily invested into my education. I ultimately believe that helped me in regards to standing out of them 200 coaches. And again, let's not forget, I was still showing up on social media daily as well. I was still posting daily, despite the fact that I couldn't really post any training or physique updates or anything like that. That was all quite popular then on Instagram. It's not really so much anymore, but back then it was. I was unable to do any of that. So I literally just used to do these talking head videos like this, just sharing tips of things in which I've learned. Ben seemed to like my content. He liked how I delivered the case study because I came across very assertive, very confident in my methods on how I achieve results and how I get guys in shape. And that would have, without a doubt, helped me stood out amongst the 200 other online coaches in which applied for that same role, and landing that job, that was my dream job. Because back then in the industry, we had groups of coaches such as the Muscle Mentors. So like if you remember the Muscle Mentors and you're a bit of an OG in the industry, you had Physique Collective, you had multiple other coaching teams. And I was seeing what Ben was doing at the time, and I was thinking, I'd love to be part of a coaching team like that. I'd absolutely love to be part of a coaching team like that. And thank God that ended up becoming a reality. But I well and truly believe a big part of that was due to how I reacted when times were tough, as opposed to when times were good. Because I could have done fuck all within them 3 months. I could have just sat back, felt sorry for myself, not showed up for my clients, not heavily invested into my education. But I even remember now thinking back, because I was coached by a guy called Ben Hawksworth at the time. We had literally just done a prep together in 2021, and it was the back end of 2021 in which I had the cardiac event, and then the 3-month training ban lapped from the end of 2021 into 2022. And then just before the summer in 2022 was when I got the job with Ben Bray. And I remember the first thing that I said to Ben Hawksworth, who was my coach at the time, when I found out that I was going to be on a 3-month training ban, I said to him, right, where are the best places in which I can go in order to invest into my education, invest into my knowledge, master the craft? And he sent me in the right direction. And I think that just goes to show there that eventually I was always going to achieve my goal. I was always going to become a full-time online coach. I was always going to go on to transform hundreds of men's physiques, because I always had that desire to continue to move forward despite the setbacks, despite the adversity, despite the hurdles in which I needed to overcome. Because trust me, to be in the position in which I am now, where I'm full-time online coaching, I work with an amazing roster of clients. Like, it was not easy getting here. It really was not easy getting here. I had a lot of setbacks along the way. I had a lot of self-doubt, a lot of imposter syndrome, but ultimately I've always done what I can to continue moving forward, always focused on the variables in which I can control, and I've always tried to get better with time, and that's always helped me in the long run when it comes to what I've achieved and my success and becoming better as a coach. So ultimately, as I say, your success is always dictated on how you react in the bad times, not how you react when times are good, because anyone can be consistent when things feel good, when things feel easy, you feel like you're in the groove. But ultimately, when you get them setbacks, when you've been hit with adversity, when you have hurdles to overcome, how are you going to react then? How are you going to react when times are tough? Because ultimately that is what's going to dictate your future success. So that's everything for this video. Like, share, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff, and I'll see you in the next one.